Hello, and welcome to the inaugural video content created by Melendy Avenue Review. I read a lot of books this year. One good thing about 2020 is there's a lot of time to read books and listen to books, and it was a lot of fun. I read a lot of good books, great books even. I read Isaac Deutscher's massive biography of Trotsky. I read literary greats ranging from Toni Morrison to Thackeray, Primo Levi, and Ngugi wa Thiong'o. I explored the worlds of science fiction with Ursula Le Guin and Olaf Stapleton. I got a little gritty with crime and spy fiction by the likes of Joseph Hansen and John le Carré. I read great masters of history, Peter Gay, George Mossop, Harry Miller. I read more recent history and social analysis by the likes of Brian Trask. Michael Trask. I keep wanting to call him Brian. I don't know why. Michael Trask, Phil Neal, Silvia Federici. I got, into the realm of sort of creative nonfiction with Carmen Maria Machado, Varlam Shalamov. I read a lot of good stuff is the point. But when you're reading a lot of stuff, you also wind up reading a lot of bad stuff. And I read my fair share of that this year. I tried to go in to every book I read, even books I read for research purposes that I know I'm not going to agree with, thinking, okay, maybe I'll like this one. Because I've been surprised before. But it didn't turn out that way with some books this year. And because people seem to like it when I talk about books I don't like, presumably because they like it when I suffer, I will be talking about some of those today. Before we get into the top 10, I want to mention a few books that I think of as, I guess you could call them dishonorable mentions. Not quite bad enough to make the top 10, but worth mentioning. First on that list, Andrew Vaxx's Flood, an 80s crime novel about a tough private eye going after sickos and freaks in the depths of New York. It's almost so bad that it's good, but not quite. Paul Auster's New York trilogy. I know people like Auster, but I found this to be really dull literary fiction that's trying to be philosophical detective fiction. I just didn't like it. Juan Donoso Cortez, essays on Catholicism, liberalism, and socialism. If you're going to be reactionary, you should at least be interesting. These essays were plodding and dull. Ultimately not that much worth my while. Finally, Dennis Lehane's Mystic River. I don't want to shit too much on Dennis Lehane because he's written a lot of stuff I like. Mystic River, though, not very good. You're better off with the movie, honestly, and I don't think the movie was that great either. Either way, let's get into the top 10. So for number 10, we have Patrick Rothfuss's The Name of the Wind. And I don't feel great about this. Patrick Rothfuss seems like a really decent guy. He organizes charities. He posts very wholesome family pictures on his blog. He seems to have a sense of humor about himself. But Name of the Wind was so highly praised and is such a nothing burger that it deserves to be mentioned here. It has a boring plot. It has dull writing. It has, worst of all, a completely unbelievable Marty Stew of a protagonist. Just the worst badassery that the early 2000s can get into without being actually morally questionable. So I wasn't having it. Maybe if this video making thing or my reviewing takes off and makes some money, I can donate some to Patrick Rothfuss's charity to make up for shitting on him. But for now, I think his book's success is kind of an indication of a strain of creative bankruptcy that's all too often rewarded in contemporary nerd culture. Next up, we have number 9, Lovecraft Country. This is another mediocre, poorly crafted story that's been praised to the skies. This one made Jim Crow seem like a non-stop horror theme park ride, not like a real system of domination and oppression that was made and suffered by real people. The cosmic horror elements in it are strictly by the numbers. Honestly, it feels like a game of tabletop RPG Call of Cthulhu being GM'd by a woke but not especially bright college sophomore. It probably doesn't help that this is a story of black protagonists written by a white guy. Why didn't the vaunted Twitter social justice mob save us all from this shining example of white male mediocrity? Where are the damn SJ dubs when you need them? I'm told the TV show is better. Jordan Peele certainly is a very talented guy, and he's kind of behind the TV adaptation. I don't really have any current plans to find out, though. Number 8, we have Albert Cosseries' The Jokers. I picked this bad boy up because I like those New York Review of Books paperbacks. They're pretty. They release kind of obscure writers. I like what they're doing. They usually sound interesting. Sometimes they kind of fail to deliver, and this is one of those times. The Jokers is about a group of dudes trolling both dictators and revolutionaries in a Middle Eastern dictatorship in the early 1960s. It sounds fun, but the trolling that they do just amounts to putting up poorly described satirical posters. Cossery seems to be trying to prove that a humorous, satirical approach to life is better than the approach taken either by the authorities or by humorless revolutionaries. And he does this through the expediency of making his troll main characters give long, humorless speeches about how good satire and humor is compared to revolution, I guess. I don't know. Number 7, another Frenchman, Gustave Le Bon, in his book The Crowd. So this was a widely read artifact. Not sure how many people read it these days, but it was widely read for a long time. It comes from the era in the late 19th century when the Western bourgeoisie was freaking out really bad over revolution. It's kind of a pseudo-sociology, and it partakes of a lot of the intellectual trends of the time. It does take an interesting question, how and why do crowds act differently from individuals, and then just sort of lards it down with racial speculation extracted from what passed as research at the time for these kind of guys, which meant, stereotypes, basically, and secondhand stories. Sometimes the stuff I read for historical reference is interesting on its own. This was not one of those times. Number 6, Nick Land, The Dark Enlightenment. Is, Dark Enlightenment and neo-reaction stuff even really still a thing on the right? Or did it all sputter out when internet fascists figured out they didn't really need pseudo-intellectual justifications to do what they do? Either way, I read this piece of shit. Supposedly, Nick Land's story is a sad one. Supposedly brilliant cultural studies / media criticism guy went batshit crazy, became a fascist and a racist, moved to China. I don't really give a shit about cultural studies as a field. I find it mostly fatuous. And I don't really give a shit about the fate of Nick Land. There were occasional nuggets of interest in the Dark Enlightenment, but by and large, it kind of combined the tedious obscurity of high theory with the stupidity and grotesquerie of racist reaction. Number 5, Sheila Heti, How Should a Person Be? This year I plumbed the depths of literary bullshit and came up with this beauty from 2010, that magical time when hipster discourse was still considered relevant and virtually anything a woman did could be considered feminist. This book is about artsy idiots wrestling with fatuous existential quandaries like the title question, jumping in and out of bed with each other. Potentially it could make for a fun or funny book. But Sheila Heti, in her uncommitted Gen X artsy way, seems to take these characters and their meaningless struggle seriously. She also can't write for beans, so this was a punishing slog as far as light novels go. Number 4, James Mason, Siege. Apparently, this is what all the fascist kids are reading, passing along the PDFs and whatnot amongst each other. Look, not to give anything away here, but as y'all see if you stick with me on this video critical journey, I actually do like a lot of right-leaning authors, including some who could only be called fascists. But Siege was just a sloppy piece of shit. It's a collection of essays written over the years by neo-Nazi James Mason, who's still around and alive, and for my money, probably collecting a federal paycheck as an informant. This book advocates for random terror to collapse the system and bring about race war. Mason praises mass killers like Charles Manson, lambasts other, more moderate fascists. Let's put it this way. The collection was put together by Michael Moynihan, who is a snooty, coy, music making and music writing fascist. Claims not to be a fascist, but he is. And it shows that he edited this work through the incompetence of the editing, the constant repetition. He just throws everything in there, and, Mason repeated himself a lot. Dull language, again, even, when he's saying things that are supposedly spicy. And most of all, just wallowing in edgelord bullshit. Number 3, Mickey Spillane, I, the Jury. There's a quote I like. The cheaper the crook, the gaudier the patter. That's something that Sam Spade tells a neophyte crook in The Maltese Falcon. And there's gaudy patter aplenty in I, the Jury. Most of it coming from Mike Hammer, the detective protagonist. And both Hammer and the novel that made him famous are very cheap indeed. Hammer wants justice for his buddy, and note, they were war buddies, okay? Manly men. There was no fruity business between them, okay? And Mike Hammer will shoot, slug, torture, but mostly just talk in excruciatingly corny tough guy language at anybody in order to get justice. This is honestly closer to pornography in terms of structure, extended build-ups leading to money shots, than it is to quality detective fiction. Number 2, Curtis Yarvin, Unqualified Reservations. Nick Land sucks, but the other main guy of the neo-reaction wave of online fascist pseudo-philosophy surfaced a few years back. Curtis Mencius Moldbug Yarvin was way worse to read. Yarvin makes many of the same points about technology, authority, race that Land does, but somebody told Yarvin that he's funny. And with characteristic critical acuity, Yarvin bought it. So this book, Unqualified Reservations, is absolutely oozing with smarmy, early aughts, nerd culture jokes and japes. Let's put it this way. You could literally suck my most honest opinions and deepest feelings out of my head and put them onto the page. But if you then put in dumb jokes about Sith Lords or self-aware asides about what a naughty boy I was to have such heterodox thoughts in every other fucking line, I would hate that book as well. And that's what reading Unqualified Reservations is. Just endless self-praise and bad jokes. That it's a brief for a white supremacist Silicon Valley run monarchy is honestly a minor point to its detriment next to Yarvin's horrible writing. And I honestly didn't think earlier this year that I'd read anything worse in this calendar year, the calendar year 2020, until I read Harassment Architecture by Mike Ma. The problem with this book isn't that it's vilely racist and misogynistic, though it is. The problem also isn't that it's a shoddy effort at literary experimentation, which is ironic given that Mike Ma is supposedly a traditionalist and he's ripping off his supposed enemies, modernist and postmodernist literature. These problems suck. But the real problem is that Mike Ma exhibits all of the weaknesses of the classic edgelord, of the type I've known since before the turn of the millennium, and he's not even funny in the bargain. He has the edgelord's aren't I a naughty boy, try-hard offensiveness, and tough guy posturing. But worse, the edgelord's insistence that he's the one who's really suffering. His heart hurts from the insincerity of society. Scratch a nihilist, and you usually find a sentimentalist. And I believe that goes both ways. Mike Ma is no exception, as the supposed badass nihilist gets all weepy about how the 1990s were the last good time and he missed out on them. Like most edgelords, Mike Ma is a prissy little shit at the end of the day, and he's only interesting in the way that he demonstrates that the right's embrace of toxic sentimentality since the Reagan period, even within the edgy subcultures on the right, they mostly preclude the right these days from producing worthwhile literature. So those are the worst books I read last year. If you want more of my content, subscribe to my Substack, which I will put a link to in the description or caption or whatever you call the text at the bottom of a YouTube video. And I guess subscribe to this channel because I plan on making more videos. Thank you and have a good one.